The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Crossroads Bar and Grill, a weathered roadside establishment that had seen better days. The gravel crunched under the tires of a modest blue sedan as it pulled into an empty spot between two hulking motorcycles. The car looked out of place among the rows of gleaming chrome and leather. Staff Sergeant James Wilson sat for a moment after turning off the engine, letting out a deep breath. The drive from Fort Benning had been longer than expected, and his shoulders ached from the hours on the road. 6 days into his first leave in 18 months, and he was already restless. 3 tours in Afghanistan had changed him in ways he was still figuring out. James checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, running a hand over his short, cropped hair. His eyes looked tired. The plan had been to drive straight through to his sister's place in Nashville, but fatigue had gotten the better of him. A quick stop, one drink to ease the tension in his shoulders, then back on the road. The bar's neon sign buzzed and flickered against the darkening sky. Cold beer, it promised. That was enough. James stepped out of his car, stretching his tall frame. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a plain navy t-shirt, and a light jacket. Nothing that screamed military, though his posture and haircut probably gave him away to anyone paying attention. He glanced around the parking lot, noting the dozen or so motorcycles lined up near the entrance. A few bore patches and insignia he didn't recognize. Old habits made him scan the surroundings one more time before heading toward the entrance. The wooden door was scratched and worn, covered in stickers and carved initials from years of patrons. Music spilled out, something country with too much bass, along with the unmistakable scent of beer and fried food. James pulled the door open and stepped inside, pausing to let his eyes adjust to the dim lighting. The place wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. A jukebox glowed in one corner, a pool table occupied the center of the room, and a long bar stretched along the back wall. Framed license plates and old road signs decorated the walls, alongside faded photographs and sports memorabilia. His military training kicked in automatically, cataloging exits, front door, kitchen door behind the bar, possibly a back entrance near the restrooms, and assessing the room's occupants. A handful of people sat at small tables, mostly in pairs or small groups. At the pool table, 2 men in denim vests lined with patches chalked their cues while a few others watched. The largest group clustered at the far end of the bar, 5 men in leather cuts with matching insignia on their backs. The Iron Wolves MC, according to the patches. James felt the shift in atmosphere the moment he entered. Conversations pausing briefly, glances turning his way, then deliberately turning away. He'd felt this before, that slight electric charge in the air when he entered certain spaces. His skin had been triggering these reactions his whole life. He chose a seat at the quieter end of the bar, leaving several empty stools between himself and the bikers. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with faded red hair pulled back in a ponytail, approached with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What can I get you?" she asked, placing a cardboard coaster in front of him. "Just a beer. Whatever's on tap, that's good," James replied, his voice low and measured. She nodded and moved to fill a glass from one of the taps. James kept his gaze forward, though he could feel eyes on his back. In the mirror behind the bar, he caught glimpses of the bikers at the far end, heads tilted together, occasional glances his way. He'd been in enough bars to recognize when his presence was causing a stir. The bartender placed a tall glass of amber beer in front of him. "Passing through?" she asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer was yes. James nodded. "Just stopped for a quick break. Driving to Nashville." $4, she said, seemingly relieved. He placed a 10 on the bar. "Keep the change." She took the bill with a small nod and moved away, back toward the group of bikers who were now laughing at something one of them had said. James took a slow sip of his beer. It was cold and surprisingly good, with a hint of citrus. He rolled his shoulders, trying to work out the stiffness from the drive. The door opened again, letting in a blast of cooler evening air along with 3 more men who clearly belonged with the biker group. They were all similarly dressed in jeans, boots, and leather vests covered in patches. The tallest of the 3, a heavy-set man with a graying beard, clapped one of the men at the bar on the shoulder. The group's volume increased as greetings were exchanged. James kept his focus on his beer, scrolling absently through messages on his phone. His sister had texted 3 times asking for his ETA. He typed a quick response. "Stopped for a break. Another 3 hours probably." The piece lasted about 5 minutes. "Hey, Rich, check out who Donna's serving now," came a voice, just loud enough to carry down the bar. "Guess they're letting anybody in these days." James didn't look up, though he felt his shoulders tense slightly. He'd heard worse. Much worse. "Maybe he's lost," another voice replied, followed by chuckles. "This ain't exactly your kind of place, is it, boy?" The last word hung in the air like smoke. James took another sip of his beer, his face impassive. 18 months in combat zones had given him perspective on what constituted actual danger. A few loudmouths in a bar didn't even register. The bartender, Donna apparently, cast an uncomfortable glance his way before busying herself wiping down already clean glasses. The other patrons seemed to find their drinks suddenly fascinating, eyes downcast. James checked his watch. 10 minutes, finish the beer and get back on the road. Easy enough. The pool game continued, balls clacking against each other. The jukebox switched songs, something with a heavy drum beat and twanging guitars. Normal bar sounds that would have been comforting if not for the undercurrent of tension in the air. The creak of a bar stool and heavy footsteps announced trouble before it arrived. James didn't need to look up to know someone was approaching. His peripheral vision caught movement. One of the bikers had detached from the group and was making his way down the bar. He was a shorter man with muscular arms covered in faded tattoos, his vest adorned with patches declaring him a sergeant at arms. The man stopped 2 stools away, leaning against the bar and staring openly at James. "You know, we got a system around here," he said, his voice carrying enough for everyone to hear. "Certain places for certain folks. Keeps everything running smooth." James finally looked up, meeting the man's gaze directly but saying nothing. "Not much for conversation, huh?" The biker smirked, glancing back at his friends who were watching with amused interest. "Just wondering if maybe you missed the sign outside that says members and guests." "Didn't see any sign," James replied calmly, taking another sip of his beer. The biker's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yeah, well, there might as well be one. This is Iron Wolf's territory. Been that way for 15 years. The bartender appeared, wiping her hands nervously on a towel. "Ray, come on. He's just passing through." Ray didn't acknowledge her, his eyes still fixed on James. "Where you headed anyway? Not many of your people around these parts." The implication was clear. James had grown up hearing variations of this his whole life. The surprise that he might be somewhere he didn't belong. The assumption that there were designated spaces for his people. "Nashville," James answered simply, keeping his voice neutral. He'd learned long ago that showing anger only escalated situations like this. "Just stopped for a quick drink." "Nashville," Ray repeated with exaggerated interest. "Got family there? Or just looking for a more suitable neighborhood?" At the far end of the bar, the other bikers were watching now, their conversation halted. The atmosphere in the room had changed, charged with potential energy. The other patrons were finding reasons to look elsewhere, that universal human instinct to avoid involvement. James glanced at his beer. Still half full, not worth it. He reached for his wallet. "Leaving so soon?" Ray asked with mock disappointment. "Thought we were just getting to know each other." "Got a long drive ahead," James replied, placing enough money on the bar to cover his tab. As he stood, another biker approached, the tall one with the gray beard who'd arrived later. He was older than the others, probably in his 50s, with hard eyes that had seen things. The patch on his vest read, "Vice President." "Ray giving you trouble, stranger?" the older man asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly concerned if that was the case. "No trouble," James said, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "Just getting back on the road." The older biker looked him up and down with a calculating gaze. Something in James's posture or expression must have registered, because the man's eyes narrowed slightly in recognition. "Military?" he asked abruptly. James nodded once. "Army." A subtle shift occurred in the room, not quite a relaxation of tension, but a slight recalibration. The older biker didn't soften, but something in his demeanor changed. "Where'd you serve?" he asked, his voice gruff but less hostile than Ray's had been. "Afghanistan. Just finished my 3rd tour." James kept his answers short, not looking for conversation but not wanting to escalate by being rude either. Before the older biker could respond, Ray cut in. "So what? We supposed to thank him for his service now, Doug? Give him a medal?" Doug shot Ray a hard look but didn't contradict him. The moment stretched, the entire bar seeming to hold its breath. James recognized the crossroads before him. He could walk out now, get in his car, and drive away. The smart choice. Or he could stay and see where this went. The soldier in him assessed the odds. 6 bikers, maybe more. Bad odds in a physical confrontation, especially in their territory, but something kept his feet planted. Maybe it was fatigue from the road or the deeper weariness from 18 months of dust and danger, or maybe it was simply that he was tired of walking away. Instead of heading for the door, James Wilson made a choice that would change the course of the evening in ways no one in the Crossroads bar could have predicted. James settled back onto his bar stool, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He took another sip of his beer, aware that every eye in the place was on him now. The jukebox had fallen silent between songs, leaving an uncomfortable quiet broken only by the soft clink of glasses and the hum of the refrigerator behind the bar. "You know," James said finally, his voice carrying in the quiet room, "I'm just here for a drink." "Same as everyone else," Ray snorted. "Yeah, well, maybe we don't want a drink with—" "That's enough," Doug cut him off, raising a hand. The older biker's weathered face was hard to read, but there was something calculating in his eyes as he studied James. Let the man finish his beer. Ray looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He shot James a dark look before retreating to the far end of the bar, muttering something under his breath that made his friends chuckle. Doug lingered a moment longer. "Afghanistan, huh?" "Rough country," James nodded. "It has its moments." "Nam for me," Doug said simply. "Different war, same shit." With that, he turned and walked back to his group, leaving James alone again. The tension in the room didn't exactly disappear, but it dialed back a notch. The jukebox kicked on again, filling the silence with a gravelly voice singing about hard times and whiskey. Donna, the bartender, approached cautiously. "You okay?" she asked quietly, wiping the bar in front of him. "I'm fine," James assured her. "Thanks." She glanced toward the bikers, then back at James. "They're not bad guys mostly, just set in their ways." James didn't respond to that. He'd heard similar excuses his whole life. People weren't bad, they were just set in their ways or from a different time or didn't know any better. None of those explanations ever made the word sting less. He checked his phone. His sister had texted again, "Drive safe. Doors unlocked whenever you get here." He should leave. Finish his beer quickly and go. But something inside him resisted. Why should he be the one to cut his drink short? The minutes ticked by. James sipped his beer slowly, scrolling through news headlines on his phone. A few customers left, replaced by new arrivals who sensed the atmosphere and kept to themselves. The bikers grew louder as they drank more, their laughter punctuated by occasional glances in James's direction. The door swung open again, admitting a blast of cool night air and 2 more men in iron wolves' cuts. One was tall and lean with a shaved head, the other shorter with a thick brown beard. They joined the group at the bar with backslaps and handshakes, ordering beers and shots. James noticed Doug leaning in, speaking to the newcomers in low tones. Both men turned to look at James, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. The shorter one with the beard said something that made the others laugh, but Doug didn't join in. James had almost finished his beer when he felt someone approach. He looked up to see the bald biker standing uncomfortably close, swaying slightly. "So you're the soldier boy," the man said, his words slightly slurred. "Vinny, Sergeant at Arms." He thumped his chest with his fist, then gestured back to the group. "You met Ray, he's just road captain." James nodded but didn't offer his hand or name. The man's proximity set off warning bells. This wasn't a friendly introduction. "Doug says we should leave you alone because you served." Vinny leaned in closer, alcohol heavy on his breath. "But see, my cousin Teddy served too. Came back in a box. And I don't recall seeing many guys who looked like you at his funeral." James kept his expression neutral. "I'm sorry about your cousin." "Are you?" Vinny's voice hardened. "You know what Teddy used to say about serving with Vinny." Doug's voice cut through. He'd approached without James noticing. "That's enough. Go cool off." Vinny's jaw tightened, but he backed up a step. "Just having a friendly chat with our guest." He directed his next words at James. "We're not done, soldier boy." With that, he turned and stalked back to the group, grabbing a shot glass from the bar and downing it in one angry gulp. Doug sighed heavily. "His cousin did die in Afghanistan, IED. Kid was only 19. James nodded. He'd seen too many 19-year-olds come home that way. "I lost friends too." Something passed between them then. a moment of understanding that transcended the tension in the room. Loss was loss, regardless of anything else. "Look," Doug said quietly, "might be best if you finish up and head out. Some of these boys have been drinking since noon." James considered this. The reasonable part of him knew Doug was right. But a deeper, more stubborn part rebelled against being pushed out. He'd spent too many years of his life adjusting his presence to make other people comfortable. "I appreciate the concern," he said finally, "but I'm not quite ready to go." Doug's expression hardened slightly. "Your choice. But I'm telling you, as a courtesy from one vet to another, this could get ugly." "Wouldn't be the first time," James replied evenly. Doug studied him for a moment longer, then shook his head. "Suit yourself." He walked back to the group, his posture tense. James ordered another beer. Maybe it was foolish, but he'd spent 18 months making life-and-death decisions in combat. He wasn't about to let a handful of bikers with outdated views dictate when he could have a drink. The atmosphere in the bar grew heavier as another half-hour passed. The pool game had ended, and now all the Iron Wolves were clustered at the bar, their voices a low rumble punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. James could feel their eyes on him, watching and waiting. 2 more customers left, sensing trouble brewing. A couple at a corner table paid their bill and hurried out, the woman casting a worried glance toward the bar as they departed. That left just James, the bartender, and the bikers. Donna looked increasingly nervous, her eyes darting between James and the group. When she brought his second beer, she leaned in close. "Please," she whispered. "I don't want trouble in my bar." "Neither do I," James assured her, placing a 20 on the counter. "But I'm not doing anything wrong." She took the money with a resigned nod. "Your funeral," she muttered, then immediately looked stricken. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," James said. "I know what you meant." The inevitable confrontation came 15 minutes later. James was scrolling through photos his sister had sent of his niece's birthday party when a shadow fell across his phone. He looked up to see Vinny, Ray, and 2 other bikers standing in a loose semicircle around him. Their postures were aggressive, shoulders squared and jaws set. "Time's up, soldier boy," Vinny said, his voice low and dangerous. "Bar's closing for you." James set his phone down carefully. "I haven't finished my drink." "Yeah, well, we decided we don't serve your kind here," Ray chimed in, his words slightly slurred. "So why don't you just—" "My kind," James interrupted, his voice steady. "You mean soldiers?" Ray's face twisted in an ugly sneer. "You know exactly what I mean." James took a slow breath. He'd faced down insurgents with AK-47s. He wasn't about to be intimidated by 4 drunk bikers with outdated prejudices, but he also wasn't looking for a fight. "Look," he said calmly, "I'm just passing through. I'll finish my beer and be on my way. No need for this to get complicated." "Already complicated," Vinny growled, stepping closer. "You should have left when you had the chance." From the corner of his eye, James saw Doug watching from the far end of the bar. The older biker's expression was grim, but he made no move to intervene. Whatever veteran solidarity they'd shared earlier had its limits. "Last chance," Ray said, reaching for James's glass. "Take a hike or—" James's hand shot out, catching Ray's wrist before he could touch the beer. The movement was lightning fast, his grip firm but controlled. Ray's eyes widened in surprise. "Don't touch my drink," James said quietly, his voice level. "Please." For a tense moment, no one moved. The only sound in the bar was the faint music from the jukebox and the hum of the refrigerator. James released Ray's wrist and the man snatched it back as if burned. "You think you're tough?" Vinny snarled, his face flushing with anger. "There's 8 of us and 1 of you, boy." James remained seated, his posture relaxed despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Combat had taught him to control his fear, to think clearly even when outnumbered. He glanced around the bar, cataloging potential weapons and exits, measuring distances and angles. "Old habits, I don't think I'm tough," James replied evenly, "and I don't want trouble. But I'm not going to be disrespected or threatened just for having a quiet drink." "Disrespected?" Ray laughed, an ugly sound. "You come into our bar, sit on our stools." "I wasn't aware this was a private establishment," James cut in. "The sign outside just says Crossroads Bar and Grill. Last I checked, that means it's open to the public." Donna had retreated to the far end of the bar, her face pale. She looked torn between calling for help and not wanting to escalate the situation further. The tension in the room was a living thing now, coiled and ready to snap. James knew he was outnumbered and in unfriendly territory. The smart move would be to leave, to swallow his pride and walk away. But something deeper held him in place, the same something that had carried him through 3 combat tours and countless other moments when he'd been made to feel unwelcome simply because of who he was. As Vinny took another step forward, his intention clear in his clenched fists and narrowed eyes, James made a decision that would change the course of the evening entirely. And in that moment, Staff Sergeant James Wilson prepared to show these men exactly who they were dealing with. James stood slowly, his movements calm and deliberate. At his full height, he towered over Ray and matched Vinny's height, his frame solid from years of military training. The bar seemed to hold its collective breath. "I think we've all had enough to drink," James said, his voice steady. "Why don't we call it a night before someone does something they'll regret?" Vinny laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, the only one with regrets is going to be you, soldier boy." The biker with the thick beard stepped forward, joining the semicircle around James. "Maybe we should take this outside. Teach him some manners." James hadn't survived 3 tours by being reckless. He assessed his options quickly. The front door was blocked by the bikers. The back exit by the restrooms was his best bet, but he'd have to move quickly. Fighting wasn't the answer here. Not against 8 men, not in their territory. "I'm going to pay my tab and leave," James announced, reaching slowly for his wallet. "That's all." "Too late for that," Ray sneered. His hand shot out, shoving James hard in the chest. James allowed himself to rock back slightly from the push, but kept his balance. His training had taught him to absorb impact, to use an opponent's momentum against them. But he made no move to retaliate. "Not yet. Don't do this," he warned quietly. Ray took his restraint for weakness and moved to shove him again. This time, James sidestepped smoothly, causing Ray to stumble forward. The biker caught himself on the bar, knocking over an empty glass that shattered on the floor. "That's enough," Donna shouted from behind the bar. "Take it outside or I'm calling the cops." "No need for cops," Vinny said, his eyes never leaving James. "We handle our own problems." The atmosphere crackled with tension. James knew the situation was spiraling toward violence. He'd been here before, not in bars with bikers, but in dusty compounds and narrow streets where tension could explode into deadly force in an instant. He recognized the signs, felt the familiar calm settling over him. Combat clarity, his sergeant had called it. "Last chance," James said, looking each man in the eye. "Let me walk out and we all go home without trouble." Vinny's response was to lunge forward, throwing a wild punch aimed at James's face. In the confined space, with his back nearly to the bar, James had limited options. He pivoted slightly, the punch grazing his cheek as he deflected most of the force with his forearm. Years of hand-to-hand combat training took over. James didn't return the punch. Escalation would only make things worse. Instead, he used Vinny's momentum to guide him past, stepping aside so the biker stumbled forward. The bearded biker moved next, grabbing for James's shirt. James broke the grip with a practiced move, twisting the man's wrist just enough to cause discomfort without injury. He pushed the biker back into Ray, creating momentary confusion. "I don't want to fight," James said again, louder this time. "I'm leaving." He began moving sideways, keeping his back away from the group, edging toward the path to the rear exit. 3 of the bikers moved to cut him off. Donna was on the phone now, her voice urgent as she spoke to what James assumed was the local police. Too little, too late. If he was going to avoid serious injury, he needed to act now. The moment of decision came when Ray pulled something from his pocket, the metallic glint of brass knuckles slipping over his fingers. The sight of the weapon changed everything. This wasn't just going to be a fistfight anymore. "He's got a weapon," Donna shouted, confirming what James had already seen. In the split second that followed, several things happened at once. Ray lunged forward, brass knuckles raised. James moved to defend himself, his body reacting on instinct and training. And from the end of the bar, Doug's voice thundered through the room. "Stand down!" The command, delivered in a voice accustomed to being obeyed, froze everyone momentarily. Doug pushed through the group, physically inserting himself between James and Ray. "I said stand down, all of you," he repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to Ray. "Take those off, now." Ray hesitated, his face flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. "Now, soldier," Doug barked, and something in his tone cut through Ray's rage. Slowly, Ray removed the brass knuckles and shoved them back in his pocket. The atmosphere remained tense, but the immediate threat of violence had receded slightly. Doug turned to James. "You, outside, now." It wasn't a request. James weighed his options quickly. Doug had just prevented what would have been an ugly fight. Following him outside might be risky, but staying in the bar with the increasingly hostile group was certainly dangerous. All right, James agreed, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The rest of you stay put, Doug ordered the group. Anyone follows us out, they answer to me. He fixed Vinny with a hard stare. Especially you. Vinny looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Doug's expression made him think better of it. He took a step back, jaw tight with suppressed anger. Doug gestured toward the front door. After you. James moved cautiously toward the exit, keeping Doug in his peripheral vision and remaining alert for any sudden movements from the others. He pushed through the door into the cool night air, grateful for the respite from the bar's tension but acutely aware that he might be walking into another kind of danger. The parking lot was dimly lit by a single overhead lamp and the neon bar sign. James positioned himself with his back to his car, ensuring he had a clear line of retreat if needed. Doug followed him out, letting the door swing shut behind them. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Doug pulled a pack of cigarettes from his vest pocket, tapped one out and lit it with practiced movements. The flame briefly illuminated his weathered face, highlighting the deep lines around his eyes. You've got some training, Doug observed finally, exhaling a cloud of smoke. The way you handled Vinny. That wasn't just bar fighting. James nodded cautiously. Army Rangers. 3 tours. Doug studied him through narrowed eyes. Rangers, huh? Tough outfit. It has its moments. James remained alert, ready to move if Doug's seemingly calm demeanor changed. Doug took another drag of his cigarette. You should have left when I told you to. Probably, James agreed. But I don't respond well to being pushed around because of how I look. Doug's expression remained unreadable in the dim light. This isn't about how you look, isn't it? James challenged quietly. Your friends made it pretty clear. Doug was silent for a moment, then surprised James by sighing heavily. Some of them, yeah. Ray's got issues. Vinny too, but it's more complicated than you think. It always is, James replied, a hint of weariness creeping into his voice. He'd heard every justification for prejudice over the years. You know what Iron Wolves MC stands for? Doug asked unexpectedly. James shook his head. Started as a veterans club back in the 70s. Guys coming back from Nam who couldn't fit in anywhere else. Doug flicked ash from his cigarette. Most of us served. Different wars, different times. James said nothing, waiting for Doug to continue. I was with the 101st Airborne. 2 tours in Nam. Doug's voice took on a distant quality. Back then, things were different. The guys who had my back over there, all kinds, all colors. Didn't matter who you were when the bullets were flying. Some things don't change, James commented. Doug nodded slowly. Yeah, but coming home, that was the hard part. Country didn't want us, treated us like garbage. The only ones who understood were other vets. James could understand that part. Civilian life had its own challenges after deployment. The constant vigilance that didn't turn off, the dreams that woke you sweating in the middle of the night, the feeling that no one around you could possibly understand what you'd seen and done. So we formed this club, Doug continued. Brotherhood, support. But over the years, he trailed off, taking another drag from his cigarette. Some of the original values got lost. Newer members came in with their own ideas, their own prejudices. And you let it happen, James observed quietly. Doug's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. It's not that simple. It never is, James repeated. But at some point you have to decide what you stand for. The door to the bar opened, spilling light and noise into the parking lot. Vinny stood in the doorway, his silhouette tense. Everything okay out here, Doug? We're fine, Doug called back. Go inside. Vinny hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave them alone. I said go inside, Doug repeated, his voice hardening, with obvious reluctance. Vinny retreated, letting the door swing shut behind him. Doug turned back to James. You need to leave now. I can't control them much longer, especially after you embarrassed Vinny in there. James studied the older man's face. You're the VP of this club. If you can't control them, who can? It's complicated, Doug repeated. No, James said firmly. It's actually very simple. Either you stand up for what's right, or you're part of the problem. Doug's expression hardened. You don't know anything about me or this club. I know enough, James replied. I know you watched your brothers treat me like I was less than human because of my skin color, and you did the bare minimum to stop it. The words hung in the night air between them. From inside the bar came the muffled sounds of raised voices. The situation in there was escalating again. Doug dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. You should go, now. James knew he was right. The smart move was to get in his car and drive away. Put this place and these people far behind him. But something kept him rooted to the spot. The same something that had made him stay for that second beer. Before I go, James said quietly, I want you to know something. Doug raised an eyebrow, waiting. When I was in Afghanistan, my unit got pinned down outside Kandahar. Bad situation, about to get worse. James kept his voice level, the memory clear in his mind. The soldier who pulled me to safety, who risked his life to save mine, looked a lot more like your friends in there than like me. And you know what? I'd have done the same for him without hesitation. That's what serving is about. Doug's expression shifted slightly, something unreadable passing across his weathered features. We're all just people, trying to get home at the end of the day, James continued. Your friends in there, they've forgotten that. Maybe you have too. Before Doug could respond, the bar door burst open again. This time it wasn't just Vinny. Ray and 3 other bikers spilled out into the parking lot, their postures aggressive, their intentions clear. Time's up, Ray called out. We're tired of waiting. James knew in that moment that the situation had reached its tipping point. What happened next would determine everything. James stood his ground as the bikers approached, spreading out in a loose semicircle. The parking lot's dim lighting cast long shadows across their faces, making their expressions harder to read. But their intentions were clear enough. I told you to wait inside, Doug said, turning to face the group. His voice carried authority, but James could hear the strain in it. We got tired of waiting, Ray replied, the brass knuckles back on his right hand. This has gone on long enough, James calculated his odds. 5 bikers plus Doug, whose allegiance remained uncertain. His car was 3 steps behind him, but even if he reached it, they could easily block him from leaving. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. You want to fight? James asked, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Is that what this is about? Proving how tough you are? Vinny stepped forward. This is about respect. You disrespected our bar, our club. By having a drink? James shook his head. No, this is about something else, and we all know it. Ray spat on the ground. Don't act like you don't know what you did. What I did was exist in a space you think I don't belong in, James replied evenly. I've been dealing with that my whole life. It's nothing new. Playing the victim card now? Vinny sneered. No victim, James said. Just stating facts. I came in for a quiet drink and you couldn't handle it. That's on you, not me. The bearded biker moved forward, fists clenched. Enough talking. Hold up. Doug raised his hand, stepping between the groups again. This isn't how we handle things. Since when? Ray challenged. You going soft on us, old man. Doug's posture stiffened. Watch yourself, Ray. You're talking to your VP. Maybe we need a new VP, Vinny muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The comment hung in the air, electric with implication. James watched as something shifted in Doug's expression, a hardening, a decision being made. The dynamics of the group were changing before his eyes, old loyalties being tested, new lines being drawn. Is that how it is? Doug asked quietly, looking from face to face. 20 years I've given to this club. Bled for it. And this is how it goes? No one answered immediately. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and loaded with tension. James saw his opportunity in their distraction. He took a small step backward, closer to his car. If they were going to fight amongst themselves, maybe he could slip away. Ray noticed the movement. Don't even think about it, he growled, pointing at James. We're not done with you. I think we are, James replied. This isn't my fight. It's between you and him now. He nodded toward Doug. Wrong, Vinny said. It's about respect. And you haven't shown any. James felt his patience wearing thin. Respect is earned, not demanded. And so far, none of you have done anything to earn mine. The bearded biker lunged forward suddenly, throwing a punch at James's head. James reacted on instinct, years of combat training taking over. He deflected the blow and countered with a short, sharp jab to the man's sternum, enough to wind him without causing serious injury. The biker stumbled back, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with surprise. I don't want to fight, James said again, louder this time, but I will defend myself. Ray and Vinny exchanged glances, then moved forward together. James braced himself, knowing that fighting two opponents at once was an entirely different challenge. Enough! The shout came not from Doug this time, but from behind the group. Everyone turned to see Donna standing by the bar entrance, a shotgun held firmly in her hands. The weapon wasn't pointed at anyone directly, but her meaning was clear. "This stops now," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The police are on their way. Anyone still fighting when they get here goes to jail." The announcement caused a ripple of unease through the bikers. Ray cursed under his breath. "Put that down, Donna," Vinny said, his tone somewhere between placating and threatening. "This doesn't concern you." "It's my bar," she replied firmly. "Everything that happens here concerns me. And I won't have this kind of trouble." Not again. The again caught James's attention. There was history here he wasn't privy to. Doug stepped forward, hands raised in a calming gesture. "Donna, we're just talking." "No need for that." "Doesn't look like talking to me," she responded, adjusting her grip on the shotgun. "Looks like you're about to beat a man 6 against 1 in my parking lot." In the distance, the faint wail of police sirens could be heard. The sound changed the equation completely. James could see the calculations happening on each biker's face, weighing pride against pragmatism, anger against self-preservation. "We don't need cops involved," Doug said, turning to the group. "Everyone back inside now." Ray hesitated, glaring at James. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Doug countered, his voice hardening. "Inside, all of you." The authority in his tone seemed to reassert itself. Slowly, reluctantly, the bikers began to move back toward the bar entrance, all except Vinny, who stood his ground. "You're making a mistake, Doug," he said quietly. "The club won't forget this." "The club was built on more than this," Doug replied. "You've forgotten what we stand for." The sirens grew louder, maybe a minute away now. Vinny spat on the ground near James's feet, then turned and followed the others inside. Donna remained at the door, shotgun still in hand, watching them file past her. When they were gone, she looked at James. "You should go now, before they get here." James nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she replied, her expression grim. "Just go." Doug remained in the parking lot, standing apart from both the bar and James. His weathered face was set in hard lines, decades of life decisions etched into every crease and furrow. "You should leave too," James told him. "Before the police arrive." Doug shook his head. "This is my mess. I'll deal with it. What will you tell them?" "The truth," Doug said simply. "That we had a disagreement that got out of hand. That nobody was hurt." James studied the older man. "And your club?" "What happens with them?" Doug's gaze drifted toward the bar, where shadows moved behind the windows. "That's a longer conversation." The sirens were very close now, perhaps turning onto the main road that led to the bar. James knew he needed to make a decision quickly. "Come with me," he said suddenly, surprising himself as much as Doug. Doug's eyebrows rose. "What?" "Come with me," James repeated. "We can talk somewhere else. Figure this out without police involvement." "Why would you offer that?" Doug asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "After what happened in there?" James wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. Maybe it was the soldier in him, the instinct to leave no man behind, or maybe it was something deeper. Recognition of a man standing at a crossroads in his life, much like the name of the bar they'd just left. "Because I think you're better than what I saw in there," James said finally. "And I think you know it too." Doug looked from James to the bar and back again, conflict evident in his eyes. The distant flash of blue and red lights reflected off the chrome of the motorcycles parked nearby. "Decision time." "I can't just leave," Doug said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "The club will still be here tomorrow," James finished for him. "But right now you need to decide what matters more, their respect or your own." The words hung in the night air between them, heavy with implication. The police would arrive any moment. Once they did, the situation would become much more complicated for everyone. Doug took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling with the weight of what he was considering. He looked toward his motorcycle, then back at the bar where his brothers, his family for the past 20 years, waited. James opened his car door. "It's your choice, but make it now." The approaching police cruiser turned into the parking lot, headlights sweeping across the gravel. In that moment of illumination, James saw something change in Doug's expression. a tension releasing, a decision made. What happened next would alter the course of both their lives in ways neither man could have predicted when the evening began. As the police car rolled to a stop, lights flashing in the darkness, Staff Sergeant James Wilson and Doug Williams, former sergeant of the 101st Airborne, made choices that would reverberate far beyond the gravel parking lot of the Crossroads Bar and Grill. Doug's weathered face showed the weight of decades of decisions as he glanced between the bar door and James's waiting car. The police cruiser rolled to a stop, its red and blue lights painting the parking lot in alternating colors. In the flash of those lights, Doug seemed to age and then somehow grow younger all at once. "Go," he said to James, his voice gruff but certain. "This is my mess to clean up." James hesitated, one foot already in his car. "You sure?" Doug nodded, squaring his shoulders as he turned toward the approaching officer. "Some battles you have to fight yourself." There was something in his posture, a resolve, a return to something fundamental, that made James believe the older man knew exactly what he was doing. With a quick nod of respect, James slid into his car and started the engine. As he pulled away, he watched in his rearview mirror as Doug walked calmly toward the police officer, hands visible at his sides. The officer's hand rested cautiously on his holster, but Doug's body language was non-threatening. Controlled, James turned onto the main road, the bar receding in his mirrors until it was just a blur of neon and flashing police lights. The confrontation was behind him physically, but his mind was still processing everything that had happened. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, giving him space to think. He drove for 20 minutes in silence before pulling into a roadside diner that advertised 24-hour service. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour. His hands were steady as he turned off the engine, but he could feel the delayed reaction setting in, the post-adrenaline crash familiar to anyone who'd been in combat. Inside, the diner was brightly lit and smelled of coffee and grilled onions. A tired-looking waitress with gray-streaked hair nodded at him as he took a seat at the counter. There were only two other customers, an elderly man reading a newspaper in a corner booth and a truck driver hunched over a plate of eggs at the far end of the counter. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, already reaching for a mug. "Please," James replied, "and whatever's quick from the kitchen." She poured the coffee and pushed the mug toward him. "Specials meatloaf tonight. Takes 10 minutes. "That works." As she scribbled his order and clipped it to the kitchen carousel, James pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from his sister. He texted her quickly. "Got delayed. We'll be there by morning." "All good." Her response came almost immediately. "Drive safe. Doors open whenever you get here." James smiled faintly, grateful for the normalcy of the exchange after the tension of the evening. He sipped his coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him, bringing him back to center. The bell over the diner door jingled. James didn't look up immediately, but some instinct, the same battlefield awareness that had kept him alive for 3 tours, made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He turned slowly on his stool. Doug stood just inside the door, his leather cut gone, wearing just a plain black t-shirt that revealed muscular arms covered in faded tattoos. Their eyes met across the diner, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Doug walked over, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor, and took the stool next to James. The waitress approached with a questioning look. "Coffee," Doug said. "Black." She poured his cup and retreated, sensing the charged atmosphere between the two men. For a long moment they sat in silence, steam rising from their mugs. Finally, Doug spoke. "Figured you'd be halfway to Nashville by now." James shrugged. "Needed to clear my head first, yeah." Doug nodded slowly. "Know the feeling." Another silence stretched between them, less tense than before but still weighted with unspoken questions. "How'd it go with the cops?" James finally asked. Doug sipped his coffee before answering. "About as well as could be expected. Told them there was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. That things had calmed down. They took my statement, talked to Donna." He paused. "She backed me up. And the others? Stayed inside. Vinny wanted to come out, but Ray held him back. Self-preservation kicked in, I guess." James nodded. He understood the instinct. "They'll be waiting for you when you go back." Doug's weathered face showed a hint of a smile, though there was no humor in it. "I'm not going back." The simple statement hung in the air between them. James studied the older man's face, seeing the certainty there. 20 years is a long time to walk away from, James observed quietly. 20 years is a long time to be walking in the wrong direction, too, Doug replied, rotating his coffee mug slowly between his palms. Sometimes you need a wake-up call to see how far you've strayed from where you meant to be. The waitress returned with James's meatloaf, setting it down with a tired smile before retreating again. James picked up his fork but didn't eat immediately. "What happened after I left?" he asked. Doug took a deep breath. "Cops left after taking statements. I went back inside, handed my cut to Vinny, and told him I was done." His voice was matter-of-fact, but James could hear the cost of those actions in the slight roughness of his tone. "How'd they take it?" "About how you'd expect. Threats, accusations, called me a traitor." Doug shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't hide the pain behind it. "The worst part is they're not wrong. I betrayed what the club was supposed to stand for. Just took me too long to see it." James ate a few bites of his meatloaf, giving Doug space to continue if he wanted to. The diner was quiet except for the occasional clink of dishes from the kitchen and the soft rustle of the elderly man turning newspaper pages. "We started that club to have each other's backs," Doug continued after a while. "When we came home from Nam, nobody understood what we'd been through. The nightmares, the flashbacks. The way a car backfiring could send you diving for cover." He shook his head. "We needed each other." "I get that," James said quietly. "It's not so different now," Doug nodded. "That's the thing. It shouldn't be different. But somewhere along the way we forgot what mattered, became something I never meant to be part of." He looked directly at James. "What you said earlier, about the guy who pulled you to safety in Afghanistan, that hit home." "Thomas," James said, the name coming easily. "Frank Thomas. White guy from Alabama with the thickest accent you ever heard. Could barely understand him half the time." A ghost of a smile crossed his face at the memory. "Best damn soldier I ever served with. You still in touch?" James's smile faded. "No, he didn't make it home. Heidi, 3 weeks before our tour ended." Doug's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry. Yeah." James pushed his plate away slightly. "The thing is, out there none of the other stuff mattered. Not where he was from, not what he looked like, not who he voted for. We were just soldiers watching each other's backs." "That's how it should be," Doug agreed. "That's how we started. Brothers who'd die for each other because we already had, in all the ways that counted." He stared into his coffee. "Somewhere along the way we forgot that." The waitress refilled their cups without asking. Outside, the night had deepened, the occasional headlights of passing cars sweeping through the windows. "So what now?" James asked. "Where do you go from here?" Doug ran a hand over his graying beard. "Not sure yet. Got a brother, actual brother, not club, in Tennessee. Might head that way for a while." "Nashville?" James asked, surprised. "Knoxville?" James nodded. "Not too far from where I'm headed." "No," Doug agreed. "Not too far at all." Something unspoken passed between them. An understanding. A recognition. Two soldiers from different wars, different backgrounds, different lives, finding common ground in the most unexpected place. "You know," James said after a moment, "my sister's place has a spare room. If you need somewhere to crash for a night before heading to Knoxville." Doug looked surprised by the offer. "Why would you do that? After tonight?" James considered the question seriously. "Because what happened at the bar, that wasn't about you and me. That was about something bigger. Something that's been going on a lot longer than either of us has been around." He met Doug's gaze steadily, and maybe the only way it ever changes is one conversation, one connection at a time. Doug was quiet for a long moment, turning the offer over in his mind. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'd appreciate that. Just for a night." "Good," James said simply. He signaled to the waitress for the check. As they walked out to the parking lot together, the night sky had cleared, revealing a canopy of stars above them. Doug paused beside his motorcycle, running a hand over the worn leather seat.